Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is episode 3 of Techno Brew, and I've got the pleasure of speaking with Joe Aburdene and Brian Buckley of Findem. Joe, Brian, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having
Pleasure to
us.
have you.
Thanks, Carlos.
So, why don't we get into some introductions here? Joe, Brian, tell me a bit about how you came into this wonderful world of AI-enabled recruitment solutions.
Yeah, sure. I can go first. So I'm actually a degreed engineer, mechanical and industrial manufacturing, not in the software space. But when I graduated, I didn't know what I was doing. I moved to LA on a whim, and 2002 was a tough market. So I ended up working as a bouncer and doing extra work before, out of desperation, taking a job with a staffing company and got into engineering recruiting. I worked for the largest North American staffing company for about 14 years in a variety of different roles. And one of the things we did was build a lot of tech internally for ourselves. We had our own ATS and all of that. And I really loved that space. When I left, I got recruited by a fellow former Aerotech colleague that brought me to a tech-enabled talent sourcing company. And in the beginning, I kind of thought I was getting into recruiting SaaS, which is what I thought would be cool. Saw that there was a lot more of the human element of it. And spent about 3.5 years there before going to an RPO and then coming to Findem, where we are truly, tech based. And our team, like you mentioned on the managed services side, get to operate the amazing technology that we put together that really blew me out of the water when I first saw it back when I was starting with that RPO. Got to use it myself and fell in love with it. But being a part of this ecosystem has been fun for the last 6 or so years since leaving traditional staffing. But yeah, I love it and love to learn what else is out there, even though my focus and strength is probably on the recruiting side of it.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, so I've actually been a part of this world for over 5 years now. I remember I just finished my master's in business innovation. I was looking for a job. I was, networking, talking to a few buddies in Cork, where I'm from, in the south of Ireland. And one of my friends was like, oh yeah, I just got a job with this company, Star Circle. They're doing some pretty cool things. Obviously, the fact that I'd just done my master's in innovation, I was like, okay, like this kind of like small company that seems to be scaling a lot was really, really appealing. So I started there, kind of like everyone in recruitment kind of stumbled into it. My very, very first call was actually with Joe. So we've come a long way ever since. So he was my manager back then, but with that company as well. So really kind of grew up. We were working with some amazing companies at Star Circle, doing some great things, and it was really special to be doing that from Cork as well. But I've always kind of had this, I guess, extra side to me that I really love traveling. So completely took advantage of the COVID situation, how everything changed. So ended up doing 2 years in Lisbon. And this year, I'm actually just back from 7 months in South America. So I was in Colombia, Argentina, Brazil. Halfway through that time, Joe reached out to me again and said, let's get the band back together. I got some really exciting projects here that we're working on at Findem. Basically kind of like grow and expand their managed services team. Myself and Joe are really kind of like bridging that gap from like this amazing technology to human experience. So I think this is a really important conversation we're having today.
And I absolutely love that you have a recruitment background. That I think has been something that is sorely missing from previous iterations of recruitment solutions that are out there. And you mentioned the tech-enabled versus pure tech. So maybe you can really kind of iterate what that means to you.
Yeah, sure. So, the technology piece is doing a lot of really the heavy lifting for accelerating the processes, but there still needs to be someone running it. We're not to a place where basically things are self-sustainable, just completely automatic. There's going to be a need for someone who understands what they're doing to be able to manipulate the technology effectively, get the right outcomes, avoid a lot of the pitfalls that come from full automation. So that's a big part of it, having people that are really qualified and understanding of this to operate the technology. Now, granted, our platform is something that goes, and a lot of these platforms, they're going directly to the recruiter. But recruiters have so much on their plate across the spectrum of what they do that it becomes really challenging for them to, learn another platform, learn another tool. If they aren't really dedicated to it, or from a leader's perspective, to operate the way they had the vision. And there's a lot of change management. So we feel like having someone who's qualified to operate this, if you're not willing to invest in understanding how to make it effective, how to operate it effectively, you're probably not going to get the most out of it. And our team is here to kind of bridge that gap. Recruiting is an art and a science, and the element of the recruiter will always be critical to the process. But being able to offload the kind of lower value or repeatable tasks that could be accelerated by automation are really the future and the way companies should be thinking about this stuff. You're seeing it across all the different types of platforms and functions in technology. You can still find a great spot as long as you focus on the things that you can't be replacing with technology.
Obviously, with AI, there's going to be a lot of supporters, people who really believe in it, people who think it's really going to improve their workplace, their efficiencies. So all of a sudden now AI is everywhere. In recruitment, it's a little bit different. AI has been around a long time. I've been in recruitment now 5 years, and I remember actually in the first year I was working with Star Circle, we went to a conference in London, and the keynote speaker opened up the conference by saying, we have one rule for the next couple of days, and that is that you cannot mention AI. So people in recruitment definitely feel a little bit different towards AI. I think it's let us down in the past. I've worked with one client recently, and they put up their job postings on LinkedIn or on their careers page, and they would get thousands of applicants. So, that is just like a human can't go through all those applicants. It just doesn't make sense in terms of, is someone really going to sit down? Is that the best use of their time to go through 1,000 applicants? So what they're doing is using resume scanners to basically qualify or disqualify prospects. And it's based off of keywords. So we were looking at all of the problems in the hiring cycle of this client. We said, is this an issue? And there's many different factors that are causing this issue, or that is resulting from this issue, even employer branding. So you're disqualifying these great candidates. Why? Is it because they're really bad at writing resumes, or is it because they're a bad candidate? So all of a sudden, then these great candidates are getting disqualified, and then years later, maybe they're going to be the great candidate for the next role, but they're saying, well, I've already applied for this company, and it was a terrible candidate experience. So it resorts back then to your employer branding. So it's been something that we've talked about in recruitment for a long time. Personally, I think we need to embrace it, but we do need to be cautious of it. Of course, it's going to have critics.
In terms of user adoption and success, what do you think needs to be shifted in terms of our mentality as a recruiter?
Yeah, look, I think generally there's always people who are going to be more adoptive or less adoptive. Like, we've worked building out sourcing solutions for the last 5 years, and one of the things that we've always come up against is recruitment skepticism. Is that, okay, like, is this going to replace me? Are you coming in to take my job, and is it going to be replaced by AI? We've always, particularly with Findem and our previous role, we've always enhanced the recruitment process or the recruiter's ability to work. So if we can take away any of these small tasks that are really time consuming, so going in and sourcing and finding all these candidates, you're still doing that through the Findem tool. It's just making it a lot easier to navigate the talent pools. So we're trying to find these candidates and put them in front of the recruiters, so they still have that job, but they're focused more on the candidate experience.
Listening to this, there's a guy that I like to follow, Greg Savage, who's a kind of a celebrity recruiter. And one of the things that he'd said was that the recruiters that refuse to embrace the technology to accelerate the tasks that cannot be achieved as quickly by a person as they can by automation are going to work themselves out of their jobs the fastest. And I totally think that that's true. And where the areas are that are unreplaceable is really that engagement piece. There will be an element where, I'll say, going back to a lot of the solutions that we've had and where there have been some breakdowns, is there are a lot of detractors out there in the recruiting space that basically, I always say, they associate their identity with their ability to be a great sourcer. So their goal when a solution like ours comes in is to prove that they're better than what we are. They can find better candidates. They already know everybody. They don't want to see success. They want to prove that that piece of their work is still done better by them. instead of shifting where they focus their strengths on to how do we engage better? How do we close better? How do we sell these opportunities? And that's something that is never going to be able to be replaced effectively by automation. So if you say, hey, I don't need to go through 1,000 resumes to find the 3 that I want to call, let automation find those 3, and I get to spend more time on the phone with these people, explaining why they want this opportunity, learning more about them and what other opportunities would be a good fit for them. That's where the real win is. So eventually, companies are going to get sick of saying, why did I pay you for 35 hours of sourcing this week and 5 hours of engagement instead of the opposite, right?
Yeah.
Just operate the tool, get those candidates fast, start talking to them faster. And that's what I think is really the future here. Where we need to go is get people on board to say, I shouldn't have to do these repetitive tasks anymore. I want to outsource that and then keep the part that basically is my differentiator. But it is a fear for sure. And I will say, even with the best sourcing technology right now, there are things that the technology relies on data and information that's basically publicly available in most cases, or even privately, but it's still not going to be able to pick up on all the nuance that a seasoned recruiter is. So there will be places where that superstar sourcing recruiter or sourcer will be able to fill in those gaps. They'll be able to network through the right audiences, do all those things to get those super hard to find unicorns that, potentially automation won't be able to do without a lot of guidance. But it'll take care of 95% of what an average recruiter can do. I even think it'll change how we train and develop or hire candidates in terms of what they're going to do and what their skills are. So the landscape of what a talent acquisition team may go from someone who is really a hunter and can find these people to someone who just knows how to manage them, and more like a salesperson for recruiting roles than it is, a traditional sourcer in this state.
I guess that's where you and Brian come in with your managed services take on enablement. Is that am I right that that's what you're tasked with doing, is making it more comprehensive and more relevant, finding those hard to find people?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Another thing that I think we really try to do is be a consultant to our customers around the strategy. So one of the things that we also found in our years of doing this is that there's a lot that needs to change with the mindset of a recruiter. And, the way the new technology operates, there's a lot of inference and a lot of kind of more unconventional ways to identify that a candidate might be a fit. But it's the recruiter's job to determine if that really is the case. So when we go into a company and we talk with them about, hey, you're struggling to find these candidates and they're using traditional Boolean searches and all that, and we say we can find these candidates that potentially would be a fit based on knowing that, this company uses this technology or has this skill, and a keyword is just not going to pick up on it. So then we go in and we show them profiles and we enrich the profiles as much as possible. But they don't necessarily trust the algorithms and things like that. And they'll still say, I don't see where this candidate has this skill on this resume. And they're basically fighting what we've developed or what other companies have developed too. And it's their mindset that needs to change. So one of the things that our CEO says, Hari, I loved the conversation I had with him, which is a big part of why I wanted to come over here. And he was saying, what we make as far as assumptions is that the data we have is accurate and it's all user submitted. So you don't know what's true, and the data is complete. And that's definitely not true as well. If someone can't be summarized in a resume, or their online profile won't have all of it. So what we run into is we'll then start showing candidates to a recruiter and say, you should reach out to these candidates because there are a lot of indicators that this person would fit your role outside of what they've written in their resume. And like Brian said, the writing the resume is a different skill than the actual job.
Yeah.
And so what we'll run into is those recruiters that then look at the profile we send and say, I don't see the skill on it, I'm not reaching out to that person, are missing a huge portion of the talent pool that we call hidden gems that we help unearth through technology, through an understanding of those subtleties and things that aren't overtly stated in a resume, So if you don't change your mindset and still recruit the exact same way, as if you didn't have the assistance of this technology, you're never going to be more successful. You're not going to get deeper into that talent pool. You're not going to find those people that maybe aren't trying to be found, but are the ideal candidate for you. You know, the algorithm isn't going to tell them, rewrite your resume, make sure you include these things that are important to our customer. You know, that's where a recruiter needs to be able to be that coach and understand their own end customer, their hiring manager, to say, this is going to be important. This is the only way this manager will believe me that you're qualified and you want to get the chance to interview for this. So
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah, it's bridging that gap.
I think as well, you know, like if you look at, you know, platforms like LinkedIn, there's just so much noise on them. You come on, everyone's trying to sell to you, everyone's trying to recruit you, and it's a hard place to be for a candidate, you know. So like what we would try to do is basically try to like tell a fuller story of each candidate. So you know, in this kind of like war for talent, you have so many companies going after the same candidates, and it's usually, you know, in the top, you know, 5 search results on LinkedIn. So it's really, really busy. And then you have these big companies who are hoarding all the best talent, and they can keep them because they can give them such great benefits. So if you're a smaller company and say, well, look, we're growing and we need, say, like the best engineers, but you know, Netflix or whoever it might be is taking all of them. So you know, how can we overcome that challenge? And platforms and solutions like Findem are really, really successful in doing that, because we can find candidates who, you know, they mightn't be really looking for a new position, or they mightn't have a great LinkedIn, they mightn't be an amazing self-marketer, but for that role, they could be perfect. So then this could be the best engineer on the market, but nobody's actually looking at them because they don't have a great LinkedIn. So, you know, bridging that gap is really, really cool.
What do you say in terms of these instances of bias that come up in output for whatever reason, be it data sets that are used, or what do you think is a means of addressing that and right setting?
Yeah. So I think a lot of this comes down to twofold. One is the operator. There are inherent biases based off of how these have been written. You know, the old Amazon story about the bias against women because the algorithms were written by men, and how men portray their experience is different than how women do, and how confident they are. There's a lot of really interesting studies out there about that sort of thing. But end of the day, it really does come down to how you think about this. And all the outputs are results of the inputs, right? So you've been in the recruiting space, and one of the things that I always struggled with is that, you know, you're still at the mercy of the hiring manager or the hiring company, where they're going to say, hey, I want to see this type of candidate, and they need to be from these schools or these companies or things like that. And a lot of those, there's already, you know, the history of bias that locked people out of this. So you need to change the mindset going into it and say, that isn't necessarily what equates to success. And there have been some really cool studies on that too, where those biases have actually been confirmed to be wrong, where, you know, some of these universities that are very prestigious don't produce better candidates than these other ones, or things like that. So if you can't change the inputs that you're giving to the algorithm, it's also going to have that bias in it. So if I say, hey, this person needs to have a degree, that's a hard fact, but there's no way you can submit someone to me. I'm putting that into it, and it's going to weed out good candidates that potentially don't have a degree. So when we're working through this, we have to really understand what is essential to the job, what alternatives are available to this, to help say, we want to present this. I think most companies now that we talk to are very focused on changing the history and changing that from a, like, we want that, but they also don't do the things. They still put in the requirements that are going to weed that candidate pool out. So you can't tell them, you're going to have to change the way you look at the talent pool and the viability of these candidates, then you're really just going to run right back into the same problem. And it's not necessarily a flaw of the machine. You know, this is a bias from the hiring manager or from the recruiter. You know, once a recruiter, they have memories of the things where they've been told this, or they've tried submitting candidates outside of it, and they get pushback. that's where a lot of this stuff, when we start to qualify a role with a client and understand what really matters and what their initiatives are from a DEI perspective, then we say, well, we know that we should try this approach, or we should avoid these sorts of things because of how it's going to be interpreted by the system, or what's going to be excluded. So that's a real key. But again, you still need to get the buy-in from the end user to accept this when they come that way. It's just like I said with the recruiter, they don't see this keyword on this. They don't see this company. They don't see this education. They don't see, hey, maybe this candidate didn't have the same promotion opportunities. So if you wanted to see someone get promoted so quickly, but they were working in an organization that did not value these differences, or, it was a little more traditional in that, then you're never going to find that person. It doesn't mean they weren't promotable. They just didn't have the same opportunity. So it comes down to those inputs. I don't like to blame technology. I tend to blame how we're using it.
I remember at a previous company, we'd done a study, and we were showing this basically to a talent acquisition team. And we were showing them how many times their job description changed before hiring a candidate. And we saw that the job description changes on average 17 times before you hire someone. So it just shows that initial parameters that you're putting for a talent pool are probably completely wrong. So we done some really cool stuff that was like, okay, what if we just rip off the job description and go into the talent pool and look at what skill sets are out there now? What is available? What is the talent pool saying to us? What's at the bottom of the funnel? And then feeding it back up into the top of the funnel and say, okay, let's actually write our job descriptions based off of the skill sets that are out there. So we're actually speaking to the people that we want rather than what the hiring manager wants.
From a recruitment perspective, it's always our job to temper expectations for a client.
Yeah, we had a pretty forward-thinking customer right along those lines, where one of the nice things about the platform is we can very quickly generate talent maps, things that we used to do manually. It's a lot of work, which is why a lot of customers won't do this, to figure out really what's available. But we had one come to us and say, we don't want to open a job and formally get it approved until we know what we're dealing with, because all of these managers had these crazy expectations. And you're saying we now have a chance to get these 3 people that will meet this, they're to be in this location, that, have these skills, that have done all this.
It's
like,
bananas.
what's the likelihood that we're going to get one of these 3? And if not, then this job stays open for 24 months. Like, is this even a priority for us? So they wanted us going in, building out the talent maps and showing, okay, we have these people available. Maybe this needs to be in a different market. Maybe we need to revise this before, so they don't have to go through 17 iterations to get to something that's reasonable to be filled in a timeline that the business needs dictate.
When it comes to in the future of AI with respect to recruitment, what makes you really excited, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think like anyone involved in recruitment or talent acquisition will tell you, like, the biggest challenge in our industry has always, or for at least as long as I've been here, and it definitely dates me, has been what we've just talked about: bias and diversity. So thankfully, I think we've got some great minds in this industry working on some great technologies that could maybe not eradicate it. I'm not sure we'll ever eradicate, but at least we can reduce bias as much as possible. It is really down then to putting, top TA people at the executive table in companies and listening to them. And I really think that, AI and technology can bring that all together.
Yeah, for me, I'll say, and I totally agree with what you said there. One of the things that I really like, and I've always been as an engineering nerd that, wants to solve all these problems before they even arise. I really like what this is allowing in terms of the ability to become more strategic and proactive. The ability to capture more data, to really understand this. And then these systems are really great around allowing you to nurture these communities and things like that, get them the right information, the right messaging, just do a better job at all of this, so that what you'll see is companies do now know what's coming as soon as they start forecasting. They aren't waiting until that role hits. They're trying to manage the right talent pools and communities and do it in the right way. And AI is really allowing that in a much better way than it had through the additional information around what the talent pool is, who these candidates are. The other thing that I really think we always have we've been talking in generalizations here, but there are really two kinds of candidates out there, and we're seeing there's always a shift in it. And what we are able to do is start focusing on finding those passive candidates that aren't trying to be discovered through some of these tools and present them with the right opportunities. Sometimes it feels pretty transactional as a recruiter, that you're just trying to fill this role. You need a body. You lose track of the fact that this is a person. You're potentially changing their lives, the organizations you're potentially impacting. So you have to keep that in mind when you're doing this outreach. Sometimes, this is someone who's not looking to be found, and, you're giving them the opportunity to actually be aware of something that, they didn't know they were missing, and really change their lives. But on the flip side, and what we're dealing with right now, is that active job seeker. There are so many more people out of work right now.
Yeah.
And I look at the problems. I have lots of friends that are, with the green logo on LinkedIn, open to work. It's tough out there. And they'll send me a job that they've applied for, and I'll see 4,000 applicants. And I'm like, man, good luck. And again, as these systems get smarter and better, the way that talent pool gets organized gets better and better. And hopefully those people that, again, aren't necessarily the best at writing resumes, I don't want to put it on them to say they need to say everything that they can or have done. I've read a lot of articles about how to make your resume more discoverable to an ATS and all this stuff. It's like, you shouldn't be gaming the system. And a resume is nothing more than a marketing document that some people know how to make well and some people don't, but it's not the person. And the more we're able to look at these insights, like the way Findem searches is attribute based versus Boolean. So it's not looking for those keywords. It's looking for these other things that kind of are how you would talk about the ideal candidate. We're making that possible. And so those candidates that need to get looked at but don't really know how to be captured effectively and get brought into these opportunities, or give a greater percentage of these people a chance to get reviewed, that's the sort of thing, again, where we take a lot of this off of their plate and free up the time of recruiters. I'm excited for that, because that candidate experience is so important. It's important for the brand of customers. It's important for being a job seeker. It's a tough time, and you want the opportunity to at least be considered, even if you don't know how to maximize your chances. And I think these sorts of things are getting there. These things, even in nurturing talent pools, being able to keep them aware of things that maybe they've forgotten, being able to sign up for talent communities and get the messaging that suits them and their behaviors. All of these things are good improvements, in my opinion. But there is still fear and pushback from a lot of these companies around it. There's so much talk about responsible AI right now. It's so new that people don't really know how to manage this. And it reminds me a little bit of when social media became very popular in the recruiting industry. What was acceptable? Could I look at your profile and disqualify you for something that you had on your Facebook page of you going out and partying or doing whatever, statements that you were making? Like, it's so new that people don't really know what's fair and what's not fair, what's right and wrong. So it'll continue to get a lot of scrutiny and a lot of pushback. But I was reading something the other day that was amazing, that even ATS adoption is pretty low. So there's still a lot of organizations that haven't even caught up to the basics. It was something like only 65% of, outside of the Fortune 500 and bigger organizations, all very advanced tools and systems. But as you move further down, the availability of this and how often it's in even the more basic tools is going to start coming up. And companies that are going to reject it, I just don't know how they're going to kind of manage these sorts of things. Like, this is an evolution that's coming. So I'm excited to see what people really are doing and how they're evaluating how responsible this AI is. Most people don't understand, and I'll put myself in that bucket, all the things that are going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And at some point, you either have to just say we trust it or we don't, to be able to move forward and compete, because it always is a war for talent, even in tough times.
I'm really glad that we're having this conversation.
Your experience really shines through. If like any of our audience wanted to, what would be the best way for them to reach out to you and learn more?
Yeah, I mean, they can always find us on LinkedIn. We're recruiters, so we're not hiding there. I'm the only Joe Aburdene in the world. Should be pretty easy. You put us in the Findem, and I'm just joe.aburdene@findem.ai. This is like, I love talking about recruiting technology. I'm a nerd for this stuff, so appreciate having the chance to talk to you on this. And yeah, always open to conversations.
Yeah, similar to me, Brian.Buckley@findem.ai. And of course, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Really appreciate the conversation, Carlos. I think maybe 12 months down the line, we should revisit it to see what has changed.
Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.